Hi everyone. So today we're going to be exploring all about pathogens and the germ theory. If we look at the learning targets, by the end of today's lesson you should be able to define and give examples of pathogens, explain direct and indirect transmission methods of disease, and define what a vector is. When we're talking about our understanding of germs and pathogens, the understanding that we have today, that was not always the case. So our understanding of what causes disease or disease agents has changed throughout history. And we can see that highlighted in the germ theory. So the germ theory states that microscopic particles cause certain diseases. And right now when we talk about this, it's common knowledge, it's common sense. We know that if we get sick, it means that there's a virus or bacteria or some form of pathogen that made us sick. However, this was not always the case. 7,000 years BC, people used to think that evil spirits are what made people sick. So they had this idea of the fact that ghosts and, evil spirits are what cause someone to be sick. And they did all these kind of weird experiments and had all of these herbal treatments to try to, get rid of the evil spirits that are making the person sick. And obviously, we look at this today and we think that's really ridiculous. But back then, that's really what people believed. But as we had scientific advances, it started to be more and more clear that there was something else that is causing disease. So in 1857, a scientist by the name of Louis Pasteur hypothesized that diseases were caused by small animals. And back then, they really didn't know the details about what those are. Obviously, now we know that those small animals, he meant things like bacteria and other microscopic agents. But he hypothesized that there were these small animals that were causing disease. We also, when we hear the name Louis Pasteur, we might think of the idea of pasteurization. So the reason why we're able to drink milk today without it spoiling within a few days is because something known as pasteurization happens to milk. So basically it's a sterilization method that prevents things like bacteria and other food spoilage agents from entering into our foods, such as milk, which allows our milk to last days and days and days, even if we leave them outside. So if you go to the co-op or the supermarket, you might see like there's milk cartons that are present, not in the fridge, just outside, and they don't spoil. They can sit there on the shelf for weeks and weeks. And the reason why they don't spoil is because there's a sterilization method known as pasteurization, which we can thank Louis Pasteur for. In 1865, Joseph Lister came up with another kind of, not really a sterilization method, but an antiseptic technique, meaning that it was a disinfecting method to surgical devices. So before this, a lot of people would go into surgery, they would be sick, they would go into surgery and they'd end up dying because they would catch some form of infection because the surgical tools that these doctors were using were not sterile. So basically, they would go in with one problem and they'd end up with a bigger problem. Thankfully, after the antiseptic technique was discovered by Joseph Lister, this decreased a lot because they were able to sterilize or make sure that the tools that they're using in surgery did not have any bacteria on them, which prevented any form of infections from happening. If we listen to the name Joseph Lister, that might also sound like Listerine, which is the mouthwash. And again, it's the idea that it does have antiseptic agents. When you use Listerine, it does kind of kill bacteria. That's what the bottle says, because of the fact that it has antiseptic abilities. In 1883, a German scientist by the name of Robert Koch basically took everything that has been going on so far in the germ theory, and he found four conditions which became known as Koch's postulates, and he proved that it was pathogens. It was things like bacteria and viruses and parasites, etc. It was pathogens that were causing the disease. So he kind of concluded all of these scientists before him were gathering this evidence leading towards this idea, leading towards this concept. And he kind of put it all together and proved it, or provided 4 main conditions that would allow or would cause things like pathogens to cause disease. And, you know, as we move forward in history and we look at the timeline that's in front of us, we'll notice that there's a lot more advances, obviously, as time goes by. The field of science and the field of medicine and the field of microbiology is not going to stop. We are always going to be seeing new diseases. We're always going to be seeing new agents that are causing human illness, especially with things like overpopulation going on, climate change. All of these things are leading to new strains of pathogens coming to be, more things that are making us sick, and obviously there's going to be more discoveries in terms of how we can combat that. The classic and most relevant example right now, and the reason why we're doing this today, is the coronavirus, which is a pathogen on itself, and you're going to be exploring that a bit further today and this week as well. And you know, we are hit by this new virus that, even though it comes from a family, coronavirus is a very common family of viruses, and there's so many different diseases that have been present throughout history that were caused by coronavirus. But now it's changed a bit, it's mutated a bit, and we are now hit with this. You know, we're entering into kind of like a pandemic, which means that it's affecting multiple countries. This disease is now spread and affecting multiple countries. And we need to understand this disease in order to hopefully find a vaccine and prevent ourselves from catching it, but also curing it one day. So that's why fields like microbiology, understanding diseases, understanding pathogens, in order to come up with treatment methods, becomes so important. So when we're talking about pathogens, the first pathogen I want to discuss is a bacteria. And bacteria are basically single-celled organisms. We already know that, meaning that they only have one cell, and they cause illness by destroying the cells of the organisms that they infect. So it does not have to be a human. Bacteria may infect other organisms such as animals, okay, or plants even. So what they do is they enter into the organism that they have infected. They then start to release their own toxins, these toxic agents. They produce them and then they release them, which causes the destruction of the cells of the organism that they have infected. Next, we have viruses, and we already talked about viruses previously in the year. We had a debate of whether or not we should consider viruses as living or non-living, but essentially, viruses contain genetic material surrounded by a protein coat. So they're very simple. They're even simpler in terms of their structure compared to bacteria. All they are is DNA or RNA. RNA is just a different form of DNA, and it's surrounded by this protein shell or protein coat. What viruses do is that they infect the organism, which we will call as the host, okay? Because remember, viruses cannot survive without a host, okay? And once they infect the host, they actually kind of like take over. They like hijack the cells of the host, and they turn their cells into these zombies that do whatever the virus tells it to do. So basically, they force the host cells, the healthy host cells, they start to kind of force these cells to make more viral cells, okay? And that's why viruses are so difficult to kill, because of the fact that they're currently not living, so you can't really kill them if they're not alive in the first place. So the only way you can get rid of them is by making sure your immune system, which we will talk about later this week, your immune system is strong enough in order to fight it on its own. So there isn't a medicine or treatment for killing a virus. So if we are infected with a bacteria, you can use an antibiotic, right? Antibiotics are medication that kill the bacteria. And they do that by basically destroying the cell wall, because most bacteria contain cell walls that the antibiotic kind of destroys. And obviously, if you destroy the cell wall / cell membrane of a cell, what does that do? it kills the cell. So antibiotics work on bacteria because they are living things, okay, and they target the cell membrane, they target the cell wall that many bacteria have, and they kind of destroy it from the outside in. However, viruses are not technically alive and they do not respond to antibiotics. So we don't really have treatment, okay, for viruses. Coronavirus right now is a type of virus. We can't really treat it with an antibiotic. So if someone has coronavirus and they go to the doctor and they say, "Can you give me an antibiotic?" it's useless, okay, for the coronavirus infection because it's a viral infection. The only way a person can combat that is by having their own body be strong enough, their immune system be strong enough to get rid of it, to get rid of that infection on their own. And we'll talk about how that happens later on during the week. The next pathogen I want to talk about is fungi or fungus. And these are multicellular. They could be multicellular or they could be single cell. So they're quite diverse in terms of, how many cells they have. They kind of will infect the host cell. So they also rely on a host cell just like viruses. And they take all the nutrients, okay? They basically hijack the host cell and they start to steal the nutrients of the host cell slowly, which eventually will cause the host healthy cells to die because they don't have any more nutrients to live off of. You'll find fungi living in warm and damp places. So mushrooms are fungi. Obviously, they're non-pathogenic. Basically, a classic example of this is athlete's foot. So a lot of the times people will have rashes, really nasty. Rashes on their feet, that's caused by a fungal infection, and that's usually because they wear shoes or they wear socks that don't allow their feet to breathe for a long period of time. And remember, because fungi love warm and damp places, so now your foot is nice and warm and sweaty, and if you somehow contract this fungus, it's going to cause this eruption of something known as an athlete's foot to happen. Super nasty. So make sure you're wearing breathable socks and, change your socks at least once a day to avoid something like that from happening. Another type of pathogen I want to talk about is a protozoa. And protozoa are single-celled organisms. We find these mostly in bodies of water, so places like lakes or ponds or swamps. And they work the same way as fungi. They hijack a host cell and then they take the nutrients from the host cell. And they need the host cell in order for them to complete their life cycles, meaning that in order for them to kind of reproduce and grow and develop and complete their life cycle, they need a host cell to do that. Then we have parasites. Parasites are multicellular organisms, so they have more than one cell. They also grow and feed on a host, and they could possibly kill the host. But let's take a look at how one example of a parasite is able to hijack another organism and kind of force it, just like a zombie, to do its own thing. So, depending on all the different pathogens that we talked about, different types of pathogens can lead to different types of infectious diseases. So here we have an example of different types of diseases. Some of them you might have heard of before, such as pneumonia, which is a lung infection. This is a type of disease that that coronavirus is causing. So a lot of people that are having severe symptoms because of the coronavirus, it's related to pneumonia. It's related to lung infections. And something really interesting that I want to talk about here is that when this whole epidemic started, when this whole coronavirus, madness started, it began in China, okay? That's where it's been basically traced to begin, in Wuhan, a city in China. And very interestingly, if we look at the number of cases that have happened, and we look at the number of people that got infected and ended up with severe symptoms and death, most of them, okay, there's a much larger number of men than women. Sorry, men, okay? But let me tell you why. So there's a hypothesis. Obviously, we don't know any of this stuff for sure. But one hypothesis is, and this might make a lot of sense, one hypothesis is that the majority, around like 60-something% of the Chinese male population smokes, okay? While around 2%, very, very small percentage of females smoke. So what that ends up doing is you have these males that have been smoking for years and years and years, 20, 30 years. Their lungs are already not the healthiest, okay? And now they get this coronavirus, flu, and all of a sudden, it really progresses into a full-on pneumonia infection, okay? Which is an infection of the lungs. Because their lungs are already so sensitive, because of years of smoking, they are much more prone to the symptoms escalating into something as pneumonia and later death. The infection of the lungs becomes so severe, their lungs shut down, they can't breathe, which leads to their death. So a lot of the times, small lifestyle choices that we make, such as smoking, really does affect our body's ability to fight diseases and when things like this happen, or just in general. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of what choices, what lifestyle choices are we making, and how is that affecting us, our overall health, and our ability to fight off pathogens if we do contract them. So you'll also see more examples of different types of diseases that were caused by other types of pathogens. And like we said, you don't really need to obviously memorize the different types of diseases and what pathogen causes them. But just, it's good to kind of be informed in terms of the fact that different types of pathogens are responsible for different types of diseases. However, something like pneumonia, as you can see here, is caused by two pathogens. It could be viral or bacterial. If pneumonia, the lung infection, is bacterial, it can be easily treated with an antibiotic. However, if it's viral, you just have to make sure your body is strong enough to fight it on its own. And that's what's happening right now with the whole coronavirus situation.
If just one of these spores lands in the right place and takes root, it can colonize a whole new area. But not all fungi feed on the dead. Days ago, a spore landed on this ant. Now she's acting strange. A network of roots has infiltrated her muscles. Her body has been taken over by cordyceps, a parasitic fungus. It floods her brain with chemicals, drugging her, compelling her to head where conditions are perfect. Just the right amount of light, just the right amount of humidity for the parasite growing inside. It forces her to clamp down in a death bite, and cordyceps reveals its gruesome nature. After 3 weeks of growth, cordyceps can release its own spores, infecting more ants.
So, depending on all the different pathogens that we talked about, different types of pathogens can lead to different types of infectious diseases. So here we have an example of different types of diseases. Some of them you might have heard of before, such as pneumonia, which is a lung infection. This is a type of disease that is that coronavirus is causing. So a lot of people that are having severe symptoms because of the coronavirus, it's related to pneumonia. It's related to lung infections. And something really interesting that I want to talk about here is that when this whole epidemic started, when this whole coronavirus, madness started, it began in China, okay? That's where it's been basically traced to begin, in Wuhan, a city in China. And very interestingly, if we look at the number of cases that have happened, and we look at the number of people that got infected and ended up with severe symptoms and death, most of them, okay, there's a much larger number of men than women. Sorry, men, okay? But let me tell you why. So there's a hypothesis. Obviously, we don't know any of this stuff for sure, but one hypothesis is the majority, around like 60-something% of the Chinese male population smokes, okay? While around 2%, very, very small percentage of females smoke. So what that ends up doing is you have these males that have been smoking for years and years and years, 20, 30 years. Their lungs are already not the healthiest, okay? And now they get this coronavirus, flu, and all of a sudden, it really progresses into a full-on pneumonia infection, okay? Which is an infection of the lungs. Because their lungs are already so sensitive, because of years of smoking, they are much more prone to the symptoms escalating into something as pneumonia and later death. The infection of the lungs becomes so severe, their lungs shut down, they can't breathe, which leads to their death. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of what choices, what lifestyle choices are we making, and how is that affecting us, our overall health, and our ability to fight off pathogens if we do contract them. So you also see more examples of different types of diseases that were caused by other types of pathogens. And like we said, you don't really need to obviously memorize the different types of diseases and what pathogen causes them. But just, it's good to kind of be informed in terms of the fact that different types of pathogens are responsible for different types of diseases. However, something like pneumonia, as you can see here, is caused by two pathogens. It could be viral or bacterial. If pneumonia, the lung infection, is bacterial, it can be easily treated with an antibiotic. However, if it's viral, you just have to make sure your body is strong enough to fight it on its own. And that's what's happening right now with the whole coronavirus situation. Now, when it comes to pathogen transfer, or the movement of pathogen from one person to another, or from one organism to another, that is known as, transfer of illness, transfer of pathogens. Pathogens can be transferred by two ways, either direct or indirect contact. Indirect contact does not require you touching an infected individual. So if someone has coronavirus, okay, or if someone has some form of viral infection or bacterial infection or whatever, you don't have to touch the person to contract it. So let's say someone walks into a room and they have coronavirus and they sneeze all over the table, and then they leave, and you come in and you have no idea that this person has been in the room, and you touch the surface, and then, without thinking, you touch your eye, or you touch your nose, or you put your hand in your mouth, you're eating a sandwich, I don't know. All of a sudden, the virus, okay, got transmitted from the surface into your body. This is indirect. Direct contact requires you to actually touch the infected individual. So this is through something like a handshake, kissing, okay? Sharing things like, I don't know, sharing spoons. It's kind of gross, but let's say you both share the same spoon or utensils or things like that, okay? So basically, when we are thinking about staying safe, okay, when such things happen, such as the coronavirus pandemic that's going on, a lot of, health organizations, such as the CDC, okay, Center for Disease Control, which is a worldwide thing, such as the Ministry of Health in Kuwait, they will come up with preventative measures, things that you can do to prevent yourself from getting sick, and it really will depend on the pathogen, okay? So they will tell you two ways you can prevent yourself from getting sick. How do you prevent yourself from getting sick directly? Don't handshake, don't kiss, avoid doing these things with people that you might think are sick, okay? Or indirectly, disinfect surfaces before you touch them, okay? Disinfect your phones. Just think about how many surfaces our phones touch. We take them everywhere. Some people take their phones with them into the bathroom, to public bathrooms. And then we bring them with us to our bedrooms. We put them underneath our pillows. You got to be careful with things like that. So obviously, you don't have to, be paranoid and like disinfect every little surface. It's good to have immunity. It's good to be exposed to, things like certain types of viruses and certain types of bacteria, so your body can build immunity. But when that strain is serious, okay, when that strain is strong, you want to prevent yourself from getting sick with that strong strain, because pathogens, families of bacteria or types of bacteria, types of viruses, and I keep referring to bacteria and viruses. Obviously there's other pathogens, but these are the two most common ones that we're kind of like exposed to. So bacteria and viruses, they come in different strains or different types. Some of them are much more serious than others. So it's good for us to be exposed to those kind of like less harmful, less severe types so that our body can build immunity. But if the strain is severe, you don't want to catch it. Let me tell you something else that I thought was very interesting. I heard this in a podcast a few days ago. If you look and if you go ahead and research this, you will see that the majority of cases that are getting sick with coronavirus and actually dying, so the majority of the mortality cases, are not children. So it's mainly much older adults, okay? Children are barely being affected by contracting the coronavirus. You might wonder, why is that? You think a child is so tiny, and that's what I thought. I thought, well, children are so like tiny and fragile, and they're kind of still building their immunity. I would have assumed that they would be the first to get sick, but no. So apparently another hypothesis is that because kids are exposed to a lot of, remember, coronavirus is not just one strain, it's a whole family of these viruses, okay? Because kids at that age are exposed to so many other strains of coronaviruses, the less the less severe strains, they're exposed to so many of these like less severe strains, their body has built enough immunity that when they are exposed to this now more severe strain, they don't catch it. Their body already is ready to fight it before it even gets them sick. So it's quite amazing how our immune system works. Again, we're going to talk more about this later on, but that's just something that I thought was very interesting and relevant to what's going on right now, what we're talking about. And it's kind of good to keep that in the back of your mind. The last thing I want to talk about today is vectors. And vectors are basically organisms that carry a pathogen and transmit it into healthy cells. Vectors can be anything, okay? They can be a mosquito. They can be any type of organism. A tick. If you know, it's like a tick is kind of like a tiny little bug. Other bugs. Bats, okay? We might be hearing a lot about bats right now because they're linked as being vectors to coronavirus. Okay, so that concludes our lesson for today. I really hope that you were able to take notes as you went through this video. If you have any specific questions about today's topic, you have till the end of this week to ask me. So again, I have posted on Google Classroom the exact details of how you can contact me. I hope you were able to benefit from this video. I hope that it was clear enough. If there's anything that you want me to kind of improve on, change, and you felt like there's something that I could do better. Remember, this is my first time doing this kind of online virtual lessons, so any tips would be appreciated. Other than that, I'll see you guys in the next lesson. Have a great day.